In this video, we're going to go through the process of looking at partial views. Now, in this particular video, we're just going to go through and actually take a segment of an existing view and we're going to move it into a partial view. Now, you may be wondering, what exactly is a partial view and what do we use it for? Partial views are where you take chunks or pieces of a view and you make them reusable. Now, there may be cases where you have a like a login module where you want that module to appear on every page. That would be a good case for a partial view. You may also have a view that presents a particular view model. So let's say, for example, as you're building your application, if you're doing an e-commerce application and you want to present an order and then you want to present some customer information on that order page, but instead of working on that customer segment or that user segment of the view over and over again, having to replicate it, you could create a partial view that just renders out user information and then include that partial inside of all your other screens or pages. And then as things maybe change in your application and you want to extend or add to your user model, you can do that and then simply add to the user model and then modify that partial view, and then the rest of your website essentially gets updated just by making that one small change. So the approach that I'm going to take with this is we're going to look at the create user. That's a simple action that I have on my account controller that I've created. So I have an account controller with a create action. That view provides me with a create new customer view. The view takes in the first name, last name, email, username, birth date, password, and then a password confirmation. And then we click create, and that'll create the user and actually add them to the database. So looking at our account controller, you'll see that we have a get and a post method for create. And our get method is actually very simplistic. It's simply a create method with just a return view. I have a create view here that I use the template generator within Visual Studio to create. But what that does for me is it provides me with all the fields that I need for my model and gets me all set up with my boxes. Then on the postback side, what I've done here is I've created some validation to make sure my password is correct, and then I'm copying the properties from my new user view model into my new user DTO. DTO stands for data transfer object. So this is the object that I'll use to push into my database. So once I have that set up, then I will go ahead and push that into my database. So I will use my data access or DB context called users. So I'll say user DB context equals new user DB context. Users. Bring that in. And we'll say context.add new user DTO. And then we will actually redirect to our list action. And the list action will set up in a moment. So that process will go through and it'll actually do the creation of a user. So if we scroll down to list, we're going to do essentially the same thing. We'll grab our context and then we will push to our context, we'll push to our view context.users, and this will be a list of users. Actually, we'll need a list of user view model. And then we'll say context.users, and then we'll go through and we'll do a select. And for each user, we'll do a new user view model, and we'll set up a new user view model for each user that comes out of that collection. So birth date will equal x.birthdate, email x.email, first name x.firstname, and we're just copying the values from our user, from our DB context, into our view model. All right, And then we'll take that collection of users, call .toList, and we'll pass our users VM list to our view. So if we go back, and what I'm actually going to do this time is typically I hit my play button, but I'm going to go ahead because I'm going to be doing a lot of back and forth and a fair bit of this code is already written. I'm going to go debug, and I'm going to say start without debugging or control F5, and what that'll do is that'll spin up IIS Express, get things up and running. It'll go through a build process, but it won't actually attach Visual Studio to my debug process, and that allows me to come back, do some changes, do some builds, flip back to the browser, and then do a quick F5 to refresh. And it just makes that process a little faster, a little smoother, in my opinion. So we'll do start without debugging, and that brings up our site. So we'll go ahead and click create user. So I'll create my first user in here. And my username will be the same. And then my password and password. We'll go ahead and click create. And we have our first user. So now we have our user, and we can kind of start working through some more things. So what I'd like to do though is I want to take this segment of my form and I'd like to pull it out and make it a reusable chunk. And the reason for that is when I go back to my list, you'll see here that I have an edit button or an edit link, and with that link I want to be able to click edit and then use the same form fields for both the create and the edit, because in theory those form fields should be pretty similar. So to do that, I need to actually take the create form and pull those pieces or those chunks out of here and put them into their own unit, which would be my partial. So to do that, I'm going to jump back to my form, and I'm going to start by going into my views folder under account. I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a view. Now my new view, I'm going to go ahead and just start with the empty without a model. Actually no, let me choose empty and then with a model, and we'll say that we're using the user view model. And we're not going to use a layout page, and we want to check the box that says create as a partial view. And you'll see when we do this, we're actually just going to create a small chunk of code, and it really for now just gives us that model declaration. So from here I then want to switch back to my create, and I want to grab everything that is within this div space, this horizontal or the form horizontal. So I'm going to grab from here all the way down to here. And what I want to do is I want to cut that. And I want to leave my begin form call there because that will actually be useful when it'll help me differentiate between my create and my edit later. So inside of here I created this view. Oh, I just called it view. That's my mistake. I should rename this, and I'm not going to call it view, but I'm going to call it user data entry form. I'm going to put an underscore in front, and then I'm going to give it the name partial. So it'll be underscore user data entry form partial. So that'll be the actual name for this partial. Then I'm going to take that HTML and I'm going to paste it. And we'll see that it drops nicely into our partial. We'll save that. And then I want to grab this name, even though it's lengthy, and I want to copy it without the .cshtml. I'll go back into my create view, and I have an HTML helper that's called partial. And there's also a render partial. For now, we'll just stick with partial. So we'll say partial, open parentheses, and then it wants the name of that partial. Now this name is not the full name with the extension. It is only the file name itself. So in this case, it would be actually underscore user data entry form partial. And what this HTML helper will do for us is it will actually go out and grab that partial from the views folder, and it will render it right inside of the page. So we'll save that. And we'll go ahead and do an F6 to build, or if you prefer, you can go up to the build menu and choose build solution. And if you remember, we went and did that debug and start without debugging. And because of that, we don't actually have to hit our play button here. We can just flip back to our browser window. We can hit F5, and ideally, if everything works correctly, we have actually no changes that we'll see. So just to make a visual change, I want to change this button from saying create to submit. So I'm going to jump into my partial, scroll down, and then we'll see down here at this last control, we have label 4, and then below that we have our input submit, and the value is create. That's where the text name comes from. So we're going to change that to submit. So again, we're changing our partials submit button to say submit. We'll flip back, F5 to refresh, and now our button says submit. So we've now created a partial of this form that we can then use and insert into other views. So we now have this reusable component.